Thank you for the opportunity to contribute to this key discussion. I speak as member of the Women's Working Group on Financing for Development that is also part of the broader CSO group. The FfD process has the potential to make an important contribution to the transformative systemic changes that are needed to achieve economic justice and the world where human rights and freedoms, environmental sustainability and gender justice are a lived reality for all people and the planet. As world leaders prepare for the final outcome of FfD3, I want to provide some recommendations on how best to surmount the financial challenges to achieve development goals by addressing 3 of the systemic issues arising from the failure of the current economic system. Overarching, however, let me first remind that development and macroeconomic policies and strategies are never gender neutral. Policies that are gender sensitive, ensure women's empowerment, and address asymmetric power should get systematically and consistently ensured globally. The first issue, overhaul of the current financial system. The framework for enhancing the coherence and consistency of the international monetary, financial, and trading systems in support of development needs to prioritize the promotion of social objectives and policies over narrow financial objectives, and, as a short-term solution, democratize the governance of the voting system in international financial institutions. Concerning the zero draft, it does not give enough emphasis to the enormous negative impacts of financial crisis caused by instability in international financial systems on development, equality, and human rights, particularly women's human rights. The draft identifies Bretton Woods institutions as important actors in the response to the financial crisis without considering their role in contributing to crises. The FfD3 outcome document should call on international financial institutions to not only be inclusive and democratic in their governance, but also to be coherent and aligned to human rights and the sustainable development goals. The UN's leadership must come out of FfD3 stronger to lead the necessary rights-based, pro-sustainable development, economic and financial reforms, in particularly responding to issues of global macroeconomic policy, including its social and ecological dimensions. Secondly, on global coherence for development and human rights. It is very concerning that global market liberalization, deregulation, and privatization continue to be promoted as the solution to sustainable development, as is evident in the zero draft and as colleagues have alluded to in the morning. As yet, past experience tells us that these same policies have contributed to deepen inequalities and affected women and girls disproportionately, posing obstacles to human rights, environmental sustainability, and self-determined sustainable development broadly. The ongoing global economic incoherence between, on the one hand, commitments to eradicate poverty and tackle inequalities, and on the other hand, policy prescriptions that promote or require market liberalization and privatization work at cross purposes and against human rights obligations. The recognition of consistency among policies in the zero draft is thus welcome. However, a mere invitation, how we see there, is not enough. Global incoherencies and inequities must be overcome, including in trade, finance, and investment, as well as combating corruption, illicit flows of funds, trade mispricing, and tax evasion. Thirdly, financing for gender justice and women's rights. The July conference will provide a historic opportunity to insist on financing that ensures the fulfillment of all people's human rights and that is gender responsive. An ambitious agenda for achieving women's rights and gender equality must be matched by ambitious resources. We are thus concerned that there is no mention of dedicated resources in the zero draft to advance women's human rights, also as this presents a regression to what was achieved in the process thus far. Similarly, the zero draft limits the call to mainstream gender equality into economic and finance policies rather than development policies in all its facets and at all levels for the full realization of women's human rights and gender equality. All countries and donors should establish robust systems to track allocations for women's rights and gender equality through disaggregated data and take action to address areas of underinvestment in women's rights, gender equality, and women's empowerment. Achieving the full realization of human rights, including women's rights, gender equality, and women's empowerment, is central to any sustainable development goal. This must be an end in itself. References in the zero draft to ensure women's equal rights and their empowerment are thus welcome. However, The inclusion of phrases that instrumentalize and commodify women are unacceptable, in that they reduce women's rights to a business case, as if to say with no economic gain, there would be no need to realize women's full human rights. Moreover, concrete commitments are needed to the full realization of women's rights, gender equality, and women's empowerment, as well as the establishment of effective accountability mechanisms for all stakeholders towards this end. Finally, also with the zero draft in mind, achieving economic justice and sustainable development is not principally a technical challenge, but rather one of political will. The challenges to global human rights and women's rights, gender justice, and sustainable development demand urgent and bold actions by all stakeholders. It's up to you all to now make sure that the potential for transformational systemic change that the FfD process still holds becomes a reality. Thank you.
I thank Ms.